Night falls slowly, not with a shout, but with a long sigh, the kind the earth gives when it finally exhales. The world darkens, and everything seems to pause. The air cools, the insects begin their whispering, and the rhythm of nature returns to something ancient, something steady. In that rhythm, humans have always felt a strange kind of peace, a peace that doesn't belong to thought or noise, but to the soft balance of wind, water, and silence. Long before we built cities, we built spaces that imitated this stillness. They were not fortresses or markets. They were open, breathing places, gardens. Imagine it, the first garden, not one designed by kings or planned by hands, but born from instinct. A clearing by the river, flat stones laid in a circle, a few branches arranged to mark the edge between wildness and care. Someone, no one remembers who, chose to tend that space, to pull a few weeds, to guide the flow of water, to plant a seed not for hunger, but for beauty. It was the first attempt to speak the language of the earth, to say, "I hear you, let me answer softly." To understand a garden is to understand patience. Nothing here hurries. Roots move slower than thought. Moss grows by memory. Stones settle into stillness over the course of centuries. Every living thing beneath the soil follows a rhythm too deep for human time. When we step into a garden, that rhythm finds us again. The heart slows, the breath deepens, the senses open. It is as if the body remembers something the mind forgot, that life, at its core, was never meant to be rushed. In every culture, gardens began as lessons written in soil. To the Sumerians, the garden was a sign of divine order, a square of perfection, drawn within chaos. To the Egyptians, it was the image of paradise, pools of water, rows of palm, and symmetry meant to echo the heavens. To the Chinese, it was a microcosm of the universe, a landscape in miniature, where stone stood for mountains, and rippling ponds reflected the sky. Every civilization looked at the wilderness and saw not threat, but possibility, a mirror in which to shape the spirit. A garden is not wild. It is not free. It is chosen. That choice, to plant, to prune, to place, is what separates a garden from the forest. It is a dialogue between what grows on its own and what grows because we care. Too much order and it dies. Too little and it disappears. The gardener stands between control and surrender, a quiet conductor of the invisible. Perhaps that is why gardening has always felt sacred, because it asks us to balance two instincts that define us, to create and to listen. The earth speaks in seasons, and the garden translates. Spring, the whisper of beginning. Summer, the deep breath of life. Autumn, the soft exhale of letting go. Winter, the silence that waits. Each one necessary, each one equal. We like to think of growth as victory, but the garden teaches otherwise. It reminds us that stillness, too, is part of the rhythm, that the falling of leaves is as important as their bloom, that nothing beautiful lasts, and that is what makes it beautiful. Every garden bears the memory of touch. The lines in the soil remember the pressure of fingers. The smoothness of a stone remembers the hand that placed it. Even the curve of a path remembers the footsteps that shaped it. Time erases the gardener, but not the gesture. A well-tended garden is not only an act of creation, it is a form of care that lingers long after the one who cared is gone. It is the earth saying thank you without words. Close your eyes in a garden. You will hear a kind of silence that is not empty. It has weight, texture, movement. The buzz of a bee is not noise. It is punctuation. The breeze through bamboo is not random. It is rhythm. Every sound is part of a language older than speech, a slow conversation between living things that understand each other perfectly. To walk through such a place is to listen to the earth breathing. We return to gardens for the same reason we return to sleep, to music, to prayer. They are spaces where the noise of the world softens just enough for us to remember our own quiet. Every garden is an argument against hurry, against greed, against the idea that life must always be loud to be full. It says, here is enough, and somehow it always is. In the beginning, the earth breathed us into being, and ever since, we've been trying to learn how to breathe with it again. The garden is our attempt. Humble, fragile, and beautiful, to join that breath. It does not belong to any one time or place. It happens wherever we stop long enough to listen. The stillness of a pond, the shadow of a tree, the quiet order of stone, each is a syllable in the earth's long exhale. And when we stand within it, we finally understand peace is not something to find, it's something to remember. Listen closely. The world is breathing, and somewhere beneath your feet, the garden is breathing with it. The world has its own geometry. You can see it in the curve of a river, in the spiral of a shell, in the way the branches of a tree reach toward the sun like open hands. Everywhere you look, the same invisible patterns repeat. The rhythm of growth, the mathematics of peace. Long before numbers had names, people felt these proportions in their bones, and when they began to build gardens, they tried to shape that feeling into form. They didn't just plant, they composed. Every peaceful space begins with a line, a path, a wall, a shadow. The first decision is always, where does stillness begin? Some lines divide, others invite. In a well-balanced garden, a path never goes straight. It turns, curves, disappears, then returns again. A reminder that discovery must be slow. A wall is never just a barrier. It creates silence. It tells the eye where to rest. The geometry of calm is not rigid. It breathes. Every angle opens softly. Every boundary hums with intention. You don't see the balance. You feel it. Harmony is not equality. It's relationship. The ancients knew this. They saw beauty not in perfection, but in proportion, in the conversation between large and small, light and dark, fullness and emptiness. In the gardens of Egypt, pools mirrored temples so that sky and earth met halfway. In Greece, olive trees lined stone courtyards in perfect rhythm with the columns nearby. In Persia, 4 rivers crossed at the garden's heart, dividing it, yet uniting it. To find peace, they aligned the human world with the divine symmetry they saw in nature. Balance became prayer. There is music in the way a garden is arranged. Every element plays its part. The pond hums softly like a cello, the wind through leaves like strings, the footstep on gravel like the beat of a drum. The gardener is the silent composer, writing with texture instead of sound. Too much pattern, and the melody stiffens. Too much freedom, and the rhythm is lost. But when both are in harmony, the listener, the walker, hears peace. It's not noise, it's resonance. You don't listen with your ears, you listen with your presence. Light alone cannot make a garden. It needs its counterpart, shadow. The way a leaf blocks sunlight, the angle of a wall at dusk, the soft darkness beneath a tree. These are not absences. They are punctuation marks in the language of calm. Ancient designers understood this. In Persia, pavilions were placed so that light moved through them like water, shifting and flowing through columns. In Japan, walls were built not to shine, but to glow, a diffused light that reveals texture, not glare. Shadow makes light human. Without it, we can't see depth. In the same way, without rest, we can't feel peace. The secret of calm is never chaos or control, it's equilibrium. You can sense it when your eyes move easily across a scene without catching on anything. The mind stops defending itself. The heart stops rushing. There is nowhere else to be. Even in vast imperial gardens, the stillness is not size, it's proportion. The same peace exists in a single bonsai tray as in an empire's courtyard, because harmony is not measured in meters, it's measured in breath. A paradox. Stillness is never truly still. A leaf trembles, a koi fish stirs beneath the surface, a breeze ripples across sand, each movement so gentle it becomes part of the calm. The eye follows these rhythms instinctively, and in doing so, forgets to think. This is not decoration, it's choreography. The garden moves like meditation, slowly, endlessly, within itself, and you, standing in its center, become part of that rhythm. The calm is not something you observe, it is something you join. When architects and gardeners speak of balance, they are not really speaking of design, they are speaking of the mind. The symmetry of a garden is the symmetry of thought. To walk through one is to align your inner landscape with the outer world. Your steps match the spacing of trees. Your breathing matches the flow of water. Your silence matches the space between sounds. This is not art. It is remembrance. The shape of calm is the shape of the self when it has nothing left to fight. Every true garden has a center, a place where everything converges, and yet nothing happens. Sometimes it's a pool, sometimes a stone, sometimes just open air. It doesn't demand attention. It absorbs it. It is the still point around which the world turns. The Persians called it the heart. The Japanese called it ma, the sacred pause. In that center, All geometry dissolves into stillness. The design ends. The listening begins. And when you leave, when the path finally ends and the world's noise returns, you carry something invisible with you. Not a shape, not a memory, but a rhythm. You walk differently. You breathe differently. You think in lines softer than before because for a moment you remembered what harmony feels like, and that is enough. Balance is not built. It is found between shadow and sun, between order and air, between the heart and the earth. Every garden is a mirror, not one made of glass, but of silence. When you walk through it, the world outside begins to blur, the noise fades, and in the quiet that remains, something unexpected appears. Your own reflection, calm and unguarded, because a garden does not show you what is around you, it shows you what is within. We think we go to gardens to observe, to look at trees, flowers, and light, but in truth, the garden is the one watching us. It studies the way we move, the way our breath slows, the way our eyes soften when they meet water. Its calmness does not demand ours. It simply waits until we remember it. The longer you stay, the more the separation dissolves, until the sound of the wind feels like your own breathing, and the curve of the path feels like the rhythm of your thoughts. At that moment, the garden stops being a place. It becomes a presence. Inside us, there are hills and rivers too, memories that flow like water, regrets that gather like stones, moments of joy that bloom and fade like petals. Garden, in its design, mirrors this geography of emotion. The clear pool at its center is the mind at peace. The winding paths are the movements of thought. The shade and sunlight are the seasons of feeling. Every element outside has its echo within. That is why the garden feels so familiar. It is made from the same material as consciousness itself: space, rhythm, and time. In almost every great garden, there is water. Sometimes it runs freely, a stream, a fountain, a trickle through moss. Sometimes it rests, a still pond that holds the sky. When we look into that water, we expect to see the world above. But what we truly see is the quiet version of ourselves. The ripples fade, the reflection steadies, and suddenly we are face to face with a truth too simple to speak. Peace is not something to find. It is something to allow. The surface clears when we stop disturbing it. So does the mind. Peace often begins with forgetting. In a garden, there are no screens, no clocks, no demands. Time moves differently here, not forward, but inward. You forget what you were worried about. You forget who you were supposed to be. You forget the need to fill the silence. And in that forgetting, you begin to remember something deeper, the self that exists beneath all motion, that quiet self, the one that simply is what the garden has been waiting to show you. When the sun shifts, the shadows move across the ground like ideas. They change shape, they overlap, they fade and return. The mind does the same. Its thoughts come and go. never still for long, but in the garden, even the shadows have grace. They move slowly, and their passing leaves no trace. Here, even impermanence feels kind, because you see, what fades is not lost. It becomes part of the rhythm. Every garden has a moment, a sound, a scent, a color that reaches the heart directly without passing through words. Maybe it's the sound of water falling. Maybe it's the smell of wet soil. Maybe it's the sight of sunlight filtering through a canopy of leaves. For a brief instant, you are not observing beauty. You are it. The separation between viewer and view disappears. You belong again to the same breath that moves through everything. And for that moment, you understand peace, not as concept, but as truth. The garden reflects, but it also instructs. It teaches that chaos is not the enemy of harmony, it is part of it. It teaches that beauty doesn't demand attention, it reveals itself only to the patient. It teaches that time can heal simply by passing quietly, and it reminds us that our inner landscape can be tended the same way we tend the earth, with care, rhythm, and forgiveness. At the heart of every garden is a turning point, the moment when the path leads not outward, but inward. You realize you are no longer walking through a space, but through yourself. Each step erases a little more noise. Each breath smooths the ripples in your mind, until finally you arrive at the still center, the point where nothing moves because nothing needs to. This is what the garden has been guiding you toward all along. Not escape, but return. The greatest mirror shows nothing. When you look into it, there is no reflection, only stillness. That stillness is not absence, it is presence purified. It is the same silence that hums between heartbeats, the same pause between thoughts, the same calm that lies beneath every storm. To see that, to feel that, is to understand why humanity keeps building gardens, not to decorate the world, but to remember the soul. In the still water, the sky rests. In the still mind, the soul remembers. The hanging gardens, between heaven and earth. There are stories the earth remembers, and there are stories the air keeps for itself. The hanging gardens of Babylon belong to the second kind. No stone remains, no root survives, no ruins rise from the sand, and yet the image endures. Terraces upon terraces, lush and heavy with life, rising out of the desert like a green dream. Vines cascading over walls, palms waving in the dry wind, streams of water shimmering down from unseen heights. A mountain built by human hands, a mountain made of breath, of love, of longing. Long ago, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, where the earth was rich, but the air burned hot, a king decided to build a paradise. His name was Nebuchadnezzar II, and his empire, Babylon, was the heart of the ancient world. He commanded temples that scraped the sky, walls that could be seen for miles, and gates the color of lapis lazuli. But the story says that the greatest thing he ever built was not for gods, nor for power, but for love. His queen, Amethyst of Media, had come from the mountains. a land of cool air and green slopes. In the heat and dust of Babylon, she longed for home, so the king ordered the unthinkable to raise the mountains themselves. Stone by stone, he built terraces that climbed toward the heavens. He filled them with trees and rivers, flowers and ferns, until the desert itself began to bloom. It was a miracle of engineering and emotion, a garden that defied the earth's own nature. The hanging gardens were more than beauty, they were defiance. To make water rise where it wished to fall, to make shade where there was only sun. This was not construction, it was resurrection. Imagine the sound, the creak of wooden pulleys, the drip of endless chains of bronze buckets lifting water from the river below, the rustle of leaves in air that had never known green. Imagine the sight, the reflection of the sky caught in 100 pools, terraces layered like steps to eternity, a woman standing among palms, her eyes full of remembered hills. It was said that in the gardens, the air itself was cool, as if the plants had taught the wind how to be kind again. We often imagine wonders as acts of pride, but this one was built from tenderness. The hanging gardens were not a monument to the gods, but a gesture toward the human heart. A man built them for a woman who missed the place she called home. There is something timeless in that. Every act of love, in its purest form, is a rebellion against absence, to build something beautiful for someone who has lost peace. That is the oldest kind of faith. The garden was not meant to be seen by the world. It was meant to soothe one soul. And that may be why it still lives, because every heart knows what that kind of beauty feels like. Ancient travelers wrote of the wonder. They described walkways wide enough for chariots, arches dripping with vines, balconies where palm trees touched the clouds. Some claimed the walls were hollow, filled with earth deep enough for cedar trees to take root. Others said the water ran through channels carved into the stone, flowing like veins through a living body. No one agreed on its shape, but all agreed on its feeling. To stand within it, they said, was to feel suspended between worlds, between heaven and earth, between dream and stone. The garden did not rest on the ground. It floated on the breath of awe. And yet, for all its wonder, no trace remains. The city of Babylon fell. Empires turned to dust. Even the river changed its course. But somehow, the hanging garden survived. Not in the soil, but in the mind. Because beauty born of love does not need to be real to endure. It only needs to be believed in. Perhaps they never existed. Perhaps they were never more than myth. But what is a myth, if not a memory that refuses to die? The hanging gardens were humanity's first metaphor for transcendence. They reached upward, not only with stone and vine, but with intention. To lift the earth toward the sky is to declare that peace, too, can be constructed. Every terrace was a prayer that harmony could be made, not found. And in that act, Babylon became more than a city. It became a state of mind, the dream of a world where beauty can grow even in desolation. Even now, when we think of paradise, we imagine it hanging somewhere above, just out of reach, half real, half remembered. That image began here. Every vertical garden, every rooftop terrace, every balcony full of life is a descendant of that dream. The hanging gardens did not vanish. They multiplied. They found new forms. Because once the human heart learns to lift nature upward, it never stops. Perhaps they never stood in stone. Perhaps they stand still in every act of care, in every green thing raised toward the light. The desert forgets quickly, but not completely. Beneath the sand, under centuries of wind and silence, something always waits. A shape, a pattern, a whisper of what once was. And so, for 2,000 years, humans have returned to the plains of Mesopotamia, searching for a miracle that refuses to be found. The ruins of Babylon stretch across the earth like a scar, great mounds of clay and broken brick, sun-bleached walls that crumble when touched. The Euphrates still flows nearby, slow and brown, a living thread between the living and the lost. Every traveler who has walked these plains has looked toward the horizon and wondered, where did the water fall from the sky? Was it here, in this silence, that the green mountain once rose? Or has the desert already swallowed the truth so deeply that even time cannot dig it out again? In the 19th century, men with shovels and dreams arrived. Europeans with wide-brimmed hats, maps, and a hunger for ancient glory. They dug through dust and myths alike, believing that the Hanging Gardens must still be buried somewhere under Babylon. And in the ruins, they found wonders, walls, inscriptions, the foundations of palaces and temples, but never the terraces, never the waterworks, never the garden itself. Each trench became another question, each discovery another silence. The mystery deepened, like the river beside it, moving, but never revealing its source. The ancient Greeks had left their testimonies, echoes passed through parchment and time. Strabo wrote of multi-level gardens watered by a hidden mechanism. Diodorus Siculus described pillars of stone and stairways wrapped in green. Philo of Byzantium spoke of a work of art surpassing all imagination, but none of them had seen it. Their words were mosaics made of rumor. The Greeks, like the archaeologists after them, were searching for more than a structure. They were searching for proof that paradise could be built by human hands. Even with centuries of excavation, no single brick has ever confirmed the legend. Babylon's remains are vast, but disordered, layer upon layer of conquest, ruin, and rebirth. The floods of the Euphrates erased much of what once stood here. Clay tablets crumble at the touch of air, and memory, that most fragile of materials, fades fastest of all. Historians began to wonder, what if the Hanging Gardens were never here at all? What if the story's roots were planted in another city, another empire, another dream? In the late 20th century, a scholar named Stephanie Dalley read the ancient Assyrian tablets and saw something everyone else had missed. There, in the records of King Sennacherib, she found descriptions of a palace without rival, surrounded by gardens that hang above the ground. Sennacherib had built a complex system of aqueducts and canals to carry water across dry valleys. a feat of engineering as grand as any myth could imagine. He even mentioned a device, a kind of screw that lifted water upward, centuries before Archimedes' time. Could it be, Dali asked, that the Hanging Gardens were not Babylonian, but Assyrian? That the wonder of the world had been misplaced by the long confusion of history? The idea changed everything. Perhaps the green terraces rose not in Babylon's dust, but in Nineveh, near the banks of the Tigris. There, among the ruins, archaeologists have found traces of aqueducts, stone channels, and carved reliefs of lush landscapes, proof that the Assyrians had already mastered the art of making the desert bloom. If true, the Hanging Gardens were not lost. They were simply misremembered, and in that misremembering, they became eternal. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, the story remains the same. A king built paradise where none should exist. Water rose where it should have fallen. Life thrived where there should have been only sand. The place may change, but the meaning does not. History may erase stones, but it cannot erase yearning. And the Hanging Gardens, wherever they truly stood, are monuments to that yearning, the desire to lift beauty out of the impossible. Today, tourists walk through the ruins of Babylon and see little more than sand and sky. But sometimes, when the wind moves just right, you can almost hear something, a faint sound, like dripping water. Of course, it's nothing, just the breeze through the cracks of ancient brick. And yet, for a heartbeat, you believe. You believe that beneath your feet, somewhere in the layers of forgotten time, roots still dream, waiting for rain. We dig for stones, but what we find is ourselves, still searching for the place where beauty touched the sky. History remembers kings for conquest, for walls and wars, for crowns and fires. But every now and then, a story survives that feels different. A story not about power, but about care. This is one of those. Ametis of Media came from a land of green, a place of mist and cedar, where rivers wound through valleys and the air smelled of snow. When she arrived in Babylon, the world turned to gold and dust. The city was magnificent, but the beauty was harsh. Its heat pressed down like silence. The horizon was endless, but empty. For a woman who had grown up listening to the sound of water against stone, it must have felt like exile. And yet, she was loved. Her husband, Nebuchadnezzar II, was not blind to her sorrow. He saw it in her eyes, in the way she watched the horizon, as if it might remember her. So he made a promise. He would bring the mountains to her. He would make water rise where there was none. He would build a piece of her homeland in the heart of the desert. It was an impossible promise, but love, when it is true, does not ask what is possible. He summoned his engineers, his architects, his artists. He ordered that terraces be raised high into the air, each filled with deep soil, each planted with trees, each watered by a hidden miracle of motion. They built a mountain that breathed, and when it was done, he called it a garden, not a temple, not a monument, just a garden. Every love has a sound. For them, it was the sound of falling water through bronze pipes and stone channels, the river was lifted upward, a constant heartbeat beneath the sun. Imagine the moment she first heard it, a soft murmur carried by the wind, the scent of damp earth in the heat, a single drop landing on dry dust, and then another and another until the silence bloomed into life. The queen must have walked among palms and vines, her hands brushing against cool leaves, her feet leaving faint prints in the wet clay. And the king, watching from below, must have seen something greater than beauty. He must have seen peace return to her face. In that instant, his city had conquered nothing, and yet it had achieved everything. Ancient texts speak of terraces like steps of a mountain, of columns that rose into the air, supporting gardens upon gardens. They say that the roots of trees were anchored in deep layers of soil, and that from the base to the highest level, streams ran like veins through the stone. At night, oil lamps reflected in the pools like constellations brought to earth. The air was cool, fragrant with cedar, jasmine, and myrtle. It was said that even the moon lingered longer above Babylon, as if it, too, wanted to rest in that calm. The garden was not merely a gift of love. It was love given shape, tangible, fragrant, alive. For all his titles, Nebuchadnezzar was still a man who watched his wife smile again and found that to be worth more than empire. There is something eternal in that image, a king kneeling before no god, but before the quiet happiness of another soul. The Hanging Gardens remind us that tenderness can build what armies cannot, that to care deeply is to shape the world around you, to bend even the laws of nature just enough to create harmony. Historians argue about the truth. They count bricks and question sources, but there is another kind of truth, the one that doesn't care for evidence. The story of Amethyst and Nebuchadnezzar feels true because it feels human. Who among us has not tried to recreate a memory, to bring back a place, a scent, a sound, something that once made the heart feel safe? He built her a mountain of peace. She gave him the reason to build it. That exchange, that quiet circle of giving and receiving, is the real foundation of the Hanging Gardens. Most kings leave ruins. He left a feeling. When Babylon fell, the walls turned to dust. The inscriptions faded. The empire vanished. But the story remained. And maybe that's what he intended. He could not stop time, but he could make something that would live in its memory. In that sense, the Hanging Gardens were not lost. They simply continued elsewhere, in every act of love that tries to make another person's world a little more bearable. We do not know how long Amethyst lived, or whether she ever saw her homeland again, but we imagine her standing among the terraces, her hands resting on the leaves, the wind cool against her skin, the city far below, a golden plain stretching to the horizon, and for a moment, she feels both here and there, Babylon and Media, desert and mountain, past and present, meeting in one breath. That, perhaps, is what the garden truly was. Not a monument, but a reconciliation, a place where longing became stillness. He built her a mountain. She gave him peace, and the world called it a wonder. Before there were words, there was water. It was the first thing the earth learned to move with, the first mirror, the first sound that could calm the heart. Every civilization began beside it. Rivers, springs, deltas, seas, each whispering the same language in different tones. To build a garden without water is to silence that voice. To bring water into the desert is to teach the impossible to sing. The hanging gardens were born from a river's patience. The Euphrates flowed endlessly below, brown, heavy, ancient, a liquid thread through empires. From it, men drew life upward, turning the wheel of bronze and wood, lifting the river toward the sky. It was not just irrigation, it was resurrection, water rising against gravity, as if the earth itself had decided to dream in reverse. Every drop that climbed was a defiance, a syllable in a prayer spoken by the hands of builders and the will of a king. Listen closely to falling water, and you'll hear more than sound. You'll hear time. Every drop repeats the same truth, that nothing ends, it only returns. The ancients understood this. To them, water was not a thing, it was a presence. It carried memory, it cleansed grief, it bridged life and death. The Babylonians saw it as divine breath, the whisper of gods flowing through the mortal world. The Greeks called it the mother of all things. In every tongue, water spoke of renewal. The garden, then, was not just a place of beauty, it was a place of listening. Imagine standing beneath the terraces, the sound of water moving above you, below you, around you. A constant pulse, soft and endless. No other wonder of the ancient world had a heartbeat. The hanging gardens did. It sang, not in words, but in rhythm. The rush through channels, the trickle between stones, the hush as it met the pools, a music made of movement. The queen, they say, used to sit near the central fountain and close her eyes. She didn't need songs. She had the river's memory echoing in the air. Water is a mirror that remembers only light. When still, it reflects the world above perfectly. When disturbed, it breaks it into fragments, tiny truths scattering like glass. In the gardens, the pools were placed not only for beauty, but for vision. They caught the stars at night, the clouds by day, the faces of lovers and kings alike. To look into them was to see heaven brought to earth, sky resting upon stone. Every ripple, every shimmer of reflection was a conversation between the divine and the human. Water does not age. It moves, evaporates, returns, but it never truly dies. In that way, it is the closest thing to eternity that the natural world allows. The hanging gardens may have vanished, their terraces lost to dust, but the water that once ran through them is still part of the world. It flows now in other rivers, falls as other rain. The same molecules that once brushed a palm leaf in ancient Babylon might now rest in an ocean half a world away. The wonder lives on, not as architecture, but as circulation, the earth's own slow remembrance. To the ancients, to control water was to control fate, but to the wise, it was something deeper. To understand water was to understand peace. Because water does not resist. It finds a path. It yields, yet carves mountains. It adapts, yet never forgets where it began. The Hanging Gardens embodied that truth. The king's will was stone. The queen's longing was water. Together they built balance, a union of firmness and flow, of order and softness. That is harmony, and that is what every garden since Babylon has tried to imitate. When you stand beside running water, you stop thinking. You start hearing, not the sound itself, but what lives inside it. Something in the body relaxes, as if remembering a rhythm it once knew. This is the secret of the garden. It doesn't teach peace, it returns it. Every stream, every pool is a memory of calm made visible. To listen to water is to listen to the earth remembering itself. The gardens are gone now. The aqueducts are silent. The wheels no longer turn, but water still flows through the cracks of time, through the ruins, through the soil, through the stories we keep telling. And when the rain falls over the plains of Iraq, each drop that hits the dust is a message written in the oldest tongue. I remember. Because water never forgets. It is history's gentlest keeper. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. The faint echo of a garden breathing, somewhere between the clouds and the earth. Water speaks softly, but it says everything. About love, about time, about how to return home. No garden lasts forever, not even one built for love. Stone cracks, roots dry, rivers change their course, and time, that patient gardener, lets every creation return to silence. But some things do not vanish, they simply change the way they exist. The end of Babylon was not sudden. Like all great empires, it faded, not in a blaze, but in dust. The walls eroded, the bricks softened, the gardens withered, water stopped climbing toward the sky, leaves turned to ash, the terraces sank back into the plain, as if the earth was taking a long breath and drawing them home again. Soon there was only the wind, and the river, and the faint memory of something green. The miracle had returned to the soil it came from. The desert does not forget, it only hides. Beneath every dune lies a story. Every gust of wind rearranges the past, burying and revealing it by turns. For centuries, travelers spoke of a place where the air once smelled of jasmine, and the sound of falling water echoed through the heat. They searched for it, mapped it, debated it, but perhaps they never understood that what they were looking for was not a place at all. It was a feeling, a memory of harmony, too fragile for history to preserve. Some ruins stand tall. Others disappear completely. The Hanging Gardens belong to the second kind. They left no walls, no columns, no foundations, only the outline of a dream. And in that absence, they became perfect. Because to endure in imagination is a purer kind of survival than stone can offer. Every artist who paints a paradise, every architect who designs balance, every poet who writes about longing, they are all rebuilding the gardens in their own way. The dream became contagious. It spread beyond Babylon, beyond history, beyond proof. We dig through earth to find traces of the past, but the true excavation happens within. The hanging gardens may never be unearthed in stone, but they bloom again each time we imagine them. The mind, after all, is the most fertile soil. Memory plants its seeds there, and even myths can take root. When you close your eyes and picture terraces of green rising from desert dust, you are participating in an ancient act, the preservation of wonder. The garden lives not because it existed, but because we keep believing that it did. All wonders are temporary. The pyramids crumble, the statues fall, the libraries burn, but wonder itself, the ability to be moved by beauty, is eternal. That, perhaps, was the unspoken purpose of the hanging gardens, not to endure in form, but to teach us how to see, to remind us that the briefest acts of tenderness, a flower watered, a wall shaded, a promise kept, can echo longer than empires. Maybe the gardens never truly died. Maybe they simply changed their shape, from terraces of stone to terraces of thought. Every modern city that plants trees on its rooftops, every small courtyard where a fountain whispers in the heat, every window box of green climbing toward light, these are fragments of Babylon, still dreaming. The miracle continues, not as spectacle, but as instinct, the desire to build beauty where there should be none. That is the same longing that moved Nebuchadnezzar's heart. What makes the hanging gardens eternal is not their existence, but their direction. They reached upward, and in doing so, they taught humanity to do the same, not toward conquest, but toward peace, not toward gods, but toward each other. Every terrace was a gesture, a reminder that life in all its fragility wants to rise. Even when we crumble, we carry that motion within us, the upward pull of care, the lift of hope, the gravity of love. Stand now in the desert where Babylon once breathed. There is no shade, no sound of water, only the wind moving through broken clay. But if you listen, really listen, you might hear something faint, the rustle of invisible leaves, the echo of forgotten rain, the whisper of a garden still hanging somewhere between the earth and the mind. It is not gone. It is waiting, waiting for the next dreamer to build it again. The garden vanished, but the dream remained, because nothing made from love ever truly fades. The Persian Kaharbag, the garden as cosmos. There is a word in ancient Persian, paridaida. It means a walled enclosure, a place apart, a sanctuary. From that single word came another, paradise. The Persians were the first to shape the idea of heaven, not as a distant realm above the clouds, but as a space that could be built, measured, designed, and entered. A paradise you could walk through. Long before the great empires of Islam and Rome, the kings of Persia dreamed of balance, a world in which man, earth, and sky were held together by design. Their answer was the Chaharbagh, the fourfold garden, a perfect square divided into 4 sections by channels of flowing water that met at the center. The 4 paths represented the rivers of life, the directions of the world. and the harmony between the elements. It was geometry as prayer, order made visible. In the heart of every chaharba lay a pool, still reflective, the intersection of heaven and earth. Around it, trees stood in perfect symmetry: pomegranates, cypress, roses, each chosen not only for beauty, but for meaning. The cypress stood for eternity, the pomegranate for fertility, the rose for divine love. The pattern repeated endlessly: 4 paths, 4 gardens, 4 streams crossing like veins in the palm of the world. The result was not just a garden, but a map of existence itself. You could walk through it as through a sacred text, each step a verse, each turn a revelation. In the Quran, paradise is described as a place where 4 rivers flow of water, milk, honey, and wine. The Persians took that vision and made it real. Their water channels glistened in the sunlight, carrying coolness through the dry air. The sound of water was constant, soft, balanced, eternal. To walk beside those streams was to feel time slow and heat dissolve into rhythm. The air shimmered with fragrance: roses, jasmine, citrus. Light danced on the ripples. It was not just landscape, it was cosmos in miniature, a human attempt to reflect the perfection of divine creation. The Chaharbagh was more than architecture, it was cosmology. Each quarter of the garden symbolized one of the 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. Together, they formed the circle of life, balanced by the stillness at the center. To stand there, in the middle of that symmetry, with water murmuring on all sides, was to feel yourself dissolve into the order of existence. The Persians understood that peace was not emptiness, it was alignment. They designed their gardens not to dominate nature, but to arrange it into harmony with the soul. Every paradise has a boundary. The walls of the Chaharbagh were not meant to exclude, they were meant to define. Inside was balance, order, light; outside, chaos, the vast and unpredictable desert. The act of enclosing was an act of meaning. By shaping the limits, the Persians created the possibility of calm. They turned emptiness into presence, a space that breathed instead of expanded. The garden became a mirror of the soul, the wall its skin, the center its heart. From above, the Chaharbagh looked like a star, a perfect cross enclosed within a square. This was not coincidence. To the Persians, geometry was a sacred language, a way of expressing what could not be spoken. Each angle carried a prayer, each proportion a truth. The lines were not decoration, they were discipline. Every fountain, every tree, every shadow was placed according to a rhythm that echoed both nature and the heavens. To enter such a space was to step into alignment, not just with the earth, but with eternity. To walk in a Persian garden was to experience transformation. The dry world outside, harsh, bright, unforgiving, fell away as soon as one crossed the threshold. Inside, the air cooled, the water whispered, and thought itself began to slow. The garden did not invite excitement, it invited comprehension. Here, the king could reflect: The poet could write, and the philosopher could listen. The Chaharbagh was not a retreat from the world. It was a restoration of it, a reminder that beneath all noise and conquest, there lies a quiet geometry, one that waits for us to notice it again. Even now, when you visit the remains of Pasargadae or Shiraz, you can still sense it, that impossible harmony, the sound of a distant fountain, the scent of citrus carried by wind, the way sunlight filters through cypress trees, all of it speaks the same sentence. This is how the world could be. The Chaharbagh was not just a place of beauty, it was an argument that heaven is not above us, it is beneath our feet, if only we learn to build it with care. They built paradise not in the sky, but in the soil, and taught the earth to remember the shape of peace. In every Persian garden, there is a hidden mathematics, not written but felt. A quiet rhythm runs through the paths, the pools, the walls. Each proportion hums with balance. Each shadow falls as if it were planned by eternity itself. The geometry of the Chaharbagh was not decoration, it was devotion. To the Persians, numbers were not abstractions, they were symbols of truth. The number 4, the rivers, the directions, the seasons, was the shape of completeness. The square represented the earth, the circle represented the divine, and where the two met, in the crossing of lines, in the pool at the center, was where heaven and earth became one. Every Chaharbagh was built around that meeting point. It was not architecture, it was cosmology rendered in brick and water. The garden was a visible prayer, an equation between symmetry and spirit. Perfection, in the Persian sense, was never cold or mechanical. It breathed. Geometry was not about control. It was about listening. By drawing lines with precision, the builders believed they could echo the invisible order of creation. The ratio between path and pool, between wall and shadow, between tree and horizon, was not aesthetic. It was moral. To live surrounded by harmony was to be reminded of justice, of humility, of truth, because the divine, they believed, was not somewhere else. It was in proportion itself. Some scholars speak of the Persian sense of measure. They mean the instinct to find beauty not in excess, but in exactness. The gardens were laid according to a rhythm, repeated distances, equal flows of water, balanced heights of tree and tower. Even the sound of the fountains was tuned to pattern, so that the trickle, the fall, and the echo created a kind of sacred music. It was a golden rhythm, a heartbeat that repeated endlessly, a physical reminder that time itself can move in circles. Walk through a Persian garden, and you will notice repetition everywhere. A path divides into two. Two become 4, 4 becomes 16, each part reflecting the whole. This is not coincidence. It is infinity translated into form. In Islamic art, the repetition of patterns was a way of revealing the eternal within the finite. A single tile, repeated endlessly, became a meditation on the nature of God, unseen, unending, everywhere. In the Chaharbagh, that same idea took shape in the land itself. It was geometry used not to measure space, but to expand it until it felt boundless. Imagine a philosopher walking through such a garden. Every turn offers a symmetry. Every glance reveals a ratio. The body relaxes because the eye is never startled. That is what order does. It quiets the mind. To the Persians, peace was a matter of structure. They believed that when form mirrors truth, the soul recognizes itself. The garden, then, was not meant to impress. It was meant to realign, to bring the human spirit back into proportion with the cosmos. You could not get lost in a chaharbagh. You could only find yourself. Even in geometry, there is silence. Between every two lines, there is a space, narrow, invisible, but full of meaning. The Persians had a word for that space, sukun, stillness. It was the pause between creation and reflection, the breath between notes in divine music. A well-built garden was full of that silence. The lines spoke softly to one another. The spaces listened. It was balance, not through sound, but through restraint. The builders knew peace is not made by addition, but by removal. The design of the chaharbagh was always oriented, aligned to the stars, to the sun, to the flow of the wind. It placed the visitor in the center of the universe, not metaphorically, but physically. When you stood in its heart, you were at the axis of creation, the point where the heavens met the earth. That alignment was not arrogance, it was awareness. It reminded every man and woman that they were not small, nor separate, but part of the great geometry of being. When sunlight struck the fountains, when shadows stretched perfectly along the paths, when the air cooled with the rhythm of the water, everything felt inevitable. That was the genius of Persian design. It did not force the world into order. It revealed the order already there. To walk through such a place was to remember that calm is not created by conquest, but by cooperation. Geometry was not a cage. It was freedom, measured carefully enough to last. In the end, the garden was an act of transtation. It turned the unseen patterns of the universe into something the human eye could touch. The divine expressed in stone, the infinite mapped in fountains, the silence of God made audible through water. It was the closest humanity had ever come to speaking heaven's language. And like all holy languages, it said only one thing, over and over: be still. Everything is already in balance. They built paradise not in the sky, but in the soil, and taught the earth to remember the shape of peace. In the Persian world, beauty was never accidental. It was a form of knowledge, and the most sacred knowledge of all was geometry, the discipline of harmony, the mathematics of peace. A garden, to the Persians, was not designed. It was composed like a verse, like a prayer. The chaharbagh was built on simple shapes: the square, the circle, the cross. But within those shapes lay the entire universe. The square represented the material world, stable, grounded, and human. The circle stood for the divine, endless, pure, without beginning or end. And the cross, the four rivers, the four directions, was the bridge between them. Together, they formed a dialogue between heaven and earth. The garden was not meant to imitate paradise. it was meant to understand it. For the builders of Persia, numbers were not mere quantities, they were qualities, symbols of divine intention. 1. Unity. 2. Reflection. 4. Order. 8. Renewal. The Chaharbagh was often an eightfold space, a square within a square, its lines dividing the world like verses of a sacred poem. Every proportion carried meaning. Every distance between fountains and trees followed the rhythm of cosmic order. When a visitor walked through it, they moved not through space, but through a prayer made visible. There is a calm that exists only in symmetry, a silence between repetitions. The Persians discovered that rhythm, and they built it into stone and water. Each step in the garden brought you into resonance with something larger than thought. You didn't need to understand geometry to feel it. The body recognizes balance long before the mind names it. It slows your breath, steadies your pulse, teaches your eyes to rest. In that stillness, mathematics becomes emotion. To draw a garden was to meditate. The architect's hand moved with precision, a ruler's edge tracing the limits of infinity. He began with a single point. From that point came lines. From those lines came form. And in that form, he placed the essence of creation, order emerging from emptiness. Each design was both a plan and a prayer, a promise that chaos could be shaped, that divinity could be translated into proportion. The garden was the physical echo of the mind of God, measured, serene, unbroken. At the heart of every Chaharbagh was an axis, the navel of the world. All paths led there, all water flowed there. It was the still point where the divine and human touched. The Persians believed that to stand at this center was to stand at the balance of existence itself. From that point, the entire garden unfolded like light through glass, each line a ray, each fountain a reflection. And when the visitor reached that axis, their steps slowed, their breath matched the rhythm of water, their mind became a mirror. That was the purpose, not to admire, but to align. Geometry is not just about what is drawn, it is also about what is not. The Persians played with absence as carefully as with form. Shadows, courtyards, still water, these were spaces of quiet, the pauses between creation and reflection. The pattern was not only seen, it was felt in the way light fell and vanished. Every morning, the sun rewrote the garden. Lines of shadow stretched and retreated, measuring time more precisely than any clock. By afternoon, the walls glowed with a golden calm, and as night came, geometry dissolved into darkness, not erased, but hidden, like faith between breaths. It is said that the builders of Persia used a measure called gaz, the length from the heart to the fingertips. Every wall, every path, was planned according to the measure of a human body. This was not arrogance, it was reverence. The Persians believed that man was the reflection of the universe, a microcosm of divine design. To use the body as measure was to admit, we are part of the same geometry. Thus, every Chaharbagh was a reminder that the sacred is not distant, It lives in the same proportions that guide our breath, our step, our gaze. When seen from above, the garden's pattern was a revelation, but when walked through, slowly, quietly, it became an experience. Each intersection of paths was a decision, each fountain a reflection, each symmetry a reminder that balance is not static, it must be lived. Geometry, in that sense, was not a rule. It was a teacher. It whispered, "All that is divine can be known if you learn to see the world as whole." Perhaps this is why the Chaharbagh endures. Even when the walls crumble, the pattern remains in memory, in architecture, in the instinct to seek balance. The mathematics of faith became the foundation of beauty in mosques, in courtyards, in every tiled dome that catches light. The Persians knew that truth does not need to shout. It only needs to repeat itself with quiet perfection. They measured the world with silence, and in each line they heard the voice of the divine. There are gardens that you see, and there are gardens that you breathe. The Persians created both. Their Gaharbagh was not only a landscape of geometry and water, but of fragrance, a world carried on the wind. When you entered it, you did not just step into shade and silence, you stepped into scent, the invisible language of paradise. In the dry air of Persia, scent is a miracle. The desert knows only dust and sun, its breath sharp and ancient. But in the gardens, the air changed. It was soft, alive, filled with rose, citrus, basil, and cypress. Each fragrance was chosen not for luxury, but for meaning. To the Persians, a garden was not complete until it could breathe. It was not only a place to look at, it was a body, inhaling and exhaling peace. No flower meant more to Persia than the rose. It was the soul of the garden, fragile, perfect, eternal. The poets wrote of it endlessly. Saadi called it the page on which love wrote its name. Hafez heard it whisper secrets to the nightingale. The nightingale sang of desire. The rose remained silent, its beauty needing no response. Together, they became symbols of the human soul, longing for what it can never fully reach, yet finding joy in the nearness of it. To walk through a chaharbagh filled with roses was to walk through poetry itself. Every petal was a verse, every fragrance a memory of divine longing. The Persians understood something profound. Light has a smell. When water strikes stone, when citrus blossoms under the sun, when night cools the air, each moment carries its own invisible essence. Morning smelled of dew and jasmine, noon of warm earth and ripe fruit, evening of musk, shadow, and sweet decay. The garden was not static. It aged and renewed itself every day, as if time passed through it like wind. Each hour had its own soul. For the Persians, aroma was not indulgence, it was devotion. Perfume was used in prayers, in libraries, in the preparation of the dead. Scent was how the unseen spoke. When you inhaled the fragrance of rose or myrtle, you were reminded of the unseen world behind the visible. A beautiful smell was proof that spirit exists, because it moves you without touching you. Thus, the garden was a temple, not of stone, but of air. Every plant in the Chaharbagh had a role, a tone in the choir of creation. Cypress, eternal life, the pillar of the world. Pomegranate, abundance, the sweetness of faith. Orange blossom, joy, purity, the fragrance of youth. Mint and basil, comfort, the breath of healing. Myrtle, love, fidelity, quiet devotion. Even the paths between them were designed so that scent unfolded like music, one note after another, never overwhelming, always in harmony. To walk there was to travel through meaning, not merely through space. Scent does not stand still. It dances. The Persians used architecture to conduct that dance. Walls directed the breeze. Fountains cooled it. Trees filtered it. As the air moved through the garden, it changed character. Dry heat transformed into soft breath, carrying fragrance from corner to corner. The result was like melody, not loud, but persistent, impossible to forget once heard. Even now, in the gardens of Shiraz or Isfahan, the air seems to hum. You walk, and with each step, something invisible touches you, as if the place itself is sighing. Persian poets were not guests of the garden, they were its voice. Rumi wrote that the garden of the soul blooms when watered by love. Hafez said, God's presence is the fragrance that never leaves the rose. Saadi compared wisdom to the scent of aloe, released only when burned. The garden gave them metaphors. They gave it eternity. Through poetry, the Shaharbagh became not only a place, but an idea, a realm where beauty and truth speak the same language. Scent is the most fragile form of time. It fades, and yet it endures more deeply than sight or sound. A single breath of rose can bring back centuries. A trace of jasmine can awaken love long gone. Perhaps that is why the Persians built their gardens this way, not to keep beauty, but to let it return again and again, each time reborn in memory. When the fragrance rises, so does remembrance, and remembrance is the beginning of peace. Even now, the Persian garden carries the same breath. At dusk, when the air cools, you can smell water before you see it. You can taste dust turning to life. You can feel time slowing in the lungs. And for a moment, you understand what the Persians always knew. Heaven is not distant. It begins with the next breath. They built paradise not to be seen, but to be breathed, so that even the air would remember love. Some ideas never stay in one place. They move, not through conquest or trade, but through beauty. The Persian garden was one such traveler. Born in the dry valleys of Iran, it crossed mountains, deserts, and centuries, carrying with it a single promise, that paradise could be built wherever there is water, light, and care. From the ancient empire of Achaemenids, the idea of the Chaharbagh began its quiet journey. Through conquest, it reached Mesopotamia. Through poetry, it reached Arabia. And through faith, it reached the world. As Islam spread from Persia into the lands of the west and east, the garden followed. It entered the courts of Samarkand, the palaces of Mughal India, the courtyards of Andalusia, and wherever it went, it changed the way people imagined heaven. In Islamic architecture, the garden became more than pleasure. It became devotion, a place to remember that beauty is an act of worship, that symmetry is not vanity, but submission to divine order. Mosques, palaces, and tombs began to echo the geometry of the Persian Chaharbagh. 4 rivers, 4 paths, 1 center. The courtyard of the great mosque of Cordoba, the pools of Alhambra, the gardens of Lahore and Agra. Each was a reinterpretation of the same truth, that the divine lives in balance. When the Moors carried Persian culture into Spain, they carried the garden with them. In Andalusia, where heat met sea breeze, the Chaharbagh found new life. The Alhambra of Granada became its western crown, a fortress of light and reflection. Water flowed through carved marble channels. Fountains spoke in quiet rhythm, and the courtyards bloomed with orange trees and myrtle. The architecture was heavy with geometry, yet weightless in spirit. It was a place not to escape the world, but to understand it, a bridge between intellect and peace. The poets of Al-Andalus called it a mirror of heaven in the dust of men. While the gardens of Spain shimmered in red stone, the Chaharbagh found another home in the east, in the hands of the Mughals of India. When Babur, the first Mughal emperor, descended from the mountains of Central Asia, he brought with him not just soldiers, but gardeners. He longed for the rivers and air of his native Fargana, and so he built his memory into the soil of India. The Mughal gardens in Kabul, Lahore, Srinagar, and Delhi were new versions of the Persian ideal. But here, they met monsoon and jungle. They became more lush, more alive. And then came Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal, not only a tomb of marble, but a garden of eternity. There too flowed the 4 rivers, meeting at a pool that reflected heaven and loss alike. It was love written in symmetry, a bridge between life and afterlife. Every civilization that received the Persian garden also inherited its philosophy, that order and beauty are not opposites, but allies, and with them came language. The Arabic word Jannah, paradise, and the Persian Bagh, garden, merged across cultures and centuries until to say garden was to speak of peace. In the West, paradise itself, from Paridaida, still carries the breath of that first wall drawn around stillness. Even in words, the garden remained a bridge. The Chaharbagh also became a vessel for knowledge. Within its walls, astronomers watched the stars, philosophers debated under cypress trees, and mathematicians studied the patterns of fountains. The garden was both retreat and classroom, a space where mind and nature could meet as equals. It taught that contemplation was not separation from the world, but a deeper way of belonging to it, that every leaf was a theorem, every drop of water a verse. The Persians had found a way to make understanding beautiful. Even as empires fell, the pattern survived. The geometry of the Chaharbagh appeared again and again, in Ottoman courtyards, in Renaissance villas, in the quiet symmetry of European parks, And though each age changed its language, the meaning remained. To plant, to water, to design, was to imitate creation. Even now, in the modern gardens of Tehran or Marrakesh, you can trace the same lines, the echo of that ancient cross, the fourfold balance of heaven and earth. The garden endures because the idea behind it never dies. Beauty as bridge, care as worship, space as peace. Every true garden connects something, the visible and the invisible, the past and the future, the human and the divine. The Persian Chaharbagh did not just unite rivers and paths, it united civilizations. From Iran to Spain, from the desert to the ocean, it carried a message written not in words, but in proportions, that to tend a garden is to tend the world, that to bring harmony to the earth is to remember what heaven feels like. Now, centuries later, you can still walk through those spaces, the Alhambra, the Taj Mahal, the ruins of Pasargadae, and feel the same quiet pulse. It is not nostalgia, it is continuity. A line drawn long ago still connects us. You breathe and realize you are standing on the bridge they built, one made not of stone, but of understanding. The garden was never meant to divide. It was meant to connect. And even now, we are still walking its paths. The journey of paradise did not end in Persia. It kept traveling, carried not by kings, but by ideas. The dream of the garden, the harmony of 4 rivers and 1 heart, crossed mountains and seas, reaching lands that had never seen the desert bloom. And wherever it arrived, it left an echo, a reflection of calm, shaped by different hands, but born from the same silence. In medieval Europe, monks built gardens behind stone walls, not to display beauty, but to preserve it. The cloister became their chaharbagh. 4 paths divided the square courtyard. A fountain rested at the center, and herbs, flowers, and fruit trees filled the air with quiet scent. It was a practical garden, for food, for medicine, for thought, but it was also a spiritual map. To walk those paths was to meditate on creation itself, a circular journey through birth, decay, and renewal. The geometry of the Persian garden had become Christian contemplation, and so, even within monastery walls, the rivers of paradise still flowed. Only now they murmured in Latin. When the world rediscovered measure and proportion, the garden followed. The villas of Renaissance Italy, in Florence, Tivoli, and Rome, were shaped by the same ancient geometry. Terraces rose in harmony with hillsides. Fountains cascaded down marble steps. Symmetry became not merely design, but philosophy. The architects studied Vitruvius and Plato, but through them, they unknowingly studied Persia, the idea of paradise, of nature ordered by intellect, of peace shaped by human hands, was reborn as humanism. Where the Persians had sought the divine, the Italians sought perfection. But in truth, they were chasing the same thing. From Italy, the dream moved north. At Versailles, it grew vast, a garden that was not heaven, but empire. Here, symmetry became power. Geometry, once a prayer, became command. Water no longer whispered, it performed. Fountains shot toward the sky, as if challenging the divine. And yet, even beneath all the gold and glory, the same rhythm remained, the fourfold order, the balance of paths, the reflection of light and water. They were all echoes of the Shaharbach's calm heart. Versailles was louder, but it still spoke the same sentence. The world can be shaped into harmony. Only now, the harmony served kings instead of gods. Then came the reaction, the soft rebellion of the English landscape garden. No more rigid lines, no more perfect squares. Nature returned to wildness, but even that wildness was planned with exquisite care. Lakes curved like brush strokes, groves framed distant hills, paths meandered toward imagined ruins. It seemed opposite to the Persian garden, but it was not. The English designers, too, were searching for peace. Only now they found it in asymmetry, in imperfection, in the gentle imitation of nature's own hand. Where the Chaharbach said, "Order is divine," the English garden whispered, "Freedom is too." Both were prayers, spoken in different tongues. Across centuries and continents, the Persian idea endured, sometimes visible, sometimes buried within style and symbol. It survived because it was not a style at all. It was a principle, a belief that the world could be arranged into something meaningful. That beauty is not decoration, but dialogue, and that to plant, to water, to measure, is to participate in creation. Every culture translated that belief into its own language, but the melody remained the same. The fourfold rhythm of life, the meeting of water and light, the stillness at the center. Even today, the echo of the Chaharbagh can be felt in courtyards, in city parks, in the quiet geometry of modern design. Minimalism, too, owes a debt to that ancient calm, the idea that space itself can speak. When an architect arranges stone and glass into balance and silence, they are repeating the same ritual that once shaped water in Persia. The prayer has changed its form, but not its meaning. Every symmetry, every reflection, every breath of stillness in the modern world is a small remembrance of the first paradise built by human hands. If you listen carefully, you can still hear it, the voice of water, the pattern of peace. It moves through centuries like a current, touching temples, palaces, and cities, reminding them to breathe. The Persians built walls, but they also built bridges, bridges of form, of thought, of longing. And though time has changed everything, one truth remains untouched. Wherever there is order, wherever there is care, wherever beauty and silence meet, there the garden still lives. From Persia to the world, the garden crossed time itself, not as a memory, but as a way of seeing. The Japanese dry gardens, the art of silence. There is a place in Kyoto where silence has weight. No water flows, no leaves move, only white gravel, gray stones, and air that seems to think. This is Ryoanji, perhaps the most famous of all Japanese dry gardens, a rectangle of stillness that contains more movement than a river. To understand a Japanese garden, one must first forget what a garden is. It is not a place of flowers or color. not a celebration of abundance. It is a question written in sand. The dry garden, or Kare Sansui, emerged in the 14th and 15th centuries, born from Zen Buddhism and the practice of meditation. The monks who built them sought not beauty, but clarity. They looked for a space where the mind could see itself without distraction, and so they removed everything that was not essential. No water, no bright color, no ornament, only what could not be removed: stone, sand, shadow. In Zen, emptiness is not absence, it is potential. A space is not void because it lacks things, but because it holds everything that could exist. The Kare Sansui embodies that truth. The raked gravel represents water, a sea without moisture. The stones stand like islands, mountains, or thoughts. The viewer completes the picture, not with the eyes, but with the imagination. Each line drawn in the sand is a ripple in the mind. Each stone placed carefully is a pause in the heart. The garden itself says nothing, and in that silence, you begin to hear yourself. If you sit in Ryoanji long enough, the body begins to change. At first, you notice the silence, thick, unbroken, as if even the air is meditating. Then you hear things you didn't before: the wind brushing wood, the faint scratch of gravel underfoot, the echo of your own breath. The longer you stay, the more sound and silence become the same thing. The garden teaches listening, not to others, but to being itself. The dry garden is not random. Its geometry is precise, its stones placed with purpose, and yet their arrangement is never obvious. At Ryoanji, there are 15 stones, but from any vantage point, you can see only 14. The missing one is the key. Perfection is never visible. It must be imagined. This, too, is Zen. To understand that what you cannot see is what completes the picture. The garden is not a landscape. It is a mirror of consciousness. The pattern of stones is the pattern of thought. When the raked lines swirl around them, they map the movement of the mind, still at the center, flowing at the edge. It is said that the monks who cared for these gardens treated every stroke of the rake as a meditation. At dawn, they entered barefoot, their robes brushing the air. They dragged wooden rakes through the gravel, forming lines, circles, waves, a choreography of breath. To watch them was to see time slowed to prayer. Each pattern would vanish with the next rain, and yet it was drawn again. Impermanence was not tragedy, it was truth. The garden existed not to endure, but to remind that endurance is illusion. In a way, the Karasansui is not a dry garden at all. There is water, but it flows beneath perception. You can see it in the raked curves, in the gentle rhythm of white and shadow. The gravel moves like current. The stones break it like islands. This invisible flow connects all parts of the garden and all moments of thought. It is the still river of being, the movement that happens when nothing moves. To Western eyes, the dry garden seems minimal, but to those who understand it, it is infinite. Its emptiness demands attention. Its simplicity hides depth. The mind cannot rush here. It slows, then settles, then begins to see. Zen masters say, the garden does not exist to be seen. It exists to be entered. not with the feet, but with the soul. The longer you look, the more you realize you are not observing the garden is observing you. When evening falls on the gravel, the shadows of stones lengthen, merging into one another until form disappears. The garden dissolves into twilight, a field of gray and light, and yet nothing is lost. The stillness that remains feels endless, like a breath held by the universe. You rise quietly, aware that something inside you has aligned, something wordless, ancient, and calm. The garden without water has taught you how to flow. There is no river, and yet everything moves. Every word that has ever been spoken has already been said by stone. It knows stillness better than silence does. It has no voice, yet it holds every sound that has ever touched it. In the Japanese dry garden, stone is not decoration, it is the sentence, the one the earth writes when it wishes to be understood. Before there were trees, before there were rivers, there was stone. It endured the birth of the world. And so, in Zen, it is the symbol of permanence, the unmoving heart around which time turns. To place a stone is to choose where eternity will stand. And yet, in the Kare Sansui, even eternity is arranged with care. No rock lies randomly. Each is set in deliberate relationship with the others, with the lines of gravel, with the viewer's gaze. It is the art of positioning the timeless inside the temporary. Japanese gardeners speak of ishi wo tateru koto, the way of setting stones. There are rules, but they are not rigid. They are principles of harmony, not formulas of control. A large stone should never dominate without purpose. A small one should never vanish without meaning. Together, they must form a rhythm, a silent dialogue. There is a language between stones that we cannot hear, but can feel. They lean toward one another, pause, resist, and rest. The result is a balance so complete that even the smallest movement would break the spell. In traditional Zen design, stones belong to 5 symbolic families. The tall stone, heaven, aspiration, the rising spirit. The low stone, earth, humility, groundedness. The reclining stone, rest, the passage of time. The arching stone, movement, transition, the bridge. The flat stone, stillness, meditation, the seat of the Buddha. A garden that holds all 5 is said to contain the world, and indeed, when you look long enough, you begin to see mountains, shores, islands, rivers, all born not from landscape, but from arrangement. The stones do not explain themselves. They wait for the observer to listen. A monk once said, "You must become the wind that has touched the stone for 1,000 years." In that patience, meaning begins to unfold. Each stone has a shadow, and each shadow has a lesson. One teaches gravity, another teaches release. To look at a stone in a Zen garden is to confront stillness as mirror, the part of you that never moves, even when the world does. When a Zen gardener places a stone, he does not place it where he wants, but where it wants to be. This is not metaphor. It is listening. He studies the shape, the texture, the direction of grain and fracture. He looks at how it catches light, how it breathes in shadow. Then, quietly, he gives it rest. Each stone, once placed, seems inevitable, as if it had always been there, waiting for discovery. To move it even slightly would be to disturb the balance of an entire world. Though they never shift, stones in a Zen garden are not static. Their stillness creates movement, a gravity that pulls the eye, a silence that carries weight. The gravel flows around them, like time around memory. They are islands in a sea that never existed, mountains rising through clouds of thought, and as light changes through the day, they change too. At dawn, they are young. At noon, strong. By evening, ancient again. The sun writes new meanings on their surfaces, and the shadows translate them back into silence. Zen masters often said, "Look at a stone long enough, and you will see your mind," because the stone does not argue, it does not seek, it simply is. It accepts sun and rain alike, erosion and time alike. It holds stillness without effort. That is the goal of meditation, to become like the stone, complete in presence, empty of striving. When the monk rakes the gravel, he is tracing the flow of thought around the stone, the restless movement of mind around the quiet center of being. In that pattern, you can see both turbulence and peace. Weight, too, is sacred. A heavy stone does not oppress the earth. It anchors it. It teaches the lesson of commitment, of being where you are without apology. To Western eyes, a large stone seems dead. To the Zen mind, it is alive precisely because it endures. To move through a dry garden is to move through degrees of weight, from gravel to rock to shadow, and to feel how each form grounds the next. Over decades, moss grows at the edges of stones. Rain darkens them, then dries to a thin dust. Cracks form. Lizards sun themselves on the warm surfaces. The garden changes without changing. Every mark, every stain, every softened edge is a brushstroke of time. It reminds the viewer that permanence is not stasis. It is patience. The stone does not resist time. It welcomes it, and so it becomes eternal. In the end, the language of stone has no translation. It is understood not by reading, but by quiet recognition. The moment when your thoughts slow to match its stillness, you look, and you stop looking. You breathe, and realize you are breathing with it. That is understanding. That is conversation. The garden has spoken, and you have heard without a single sound. The stone never moves, and yet it teaches all that moves how to be still. Perfection is a myth. Harmony, however, harmony can live in the cracks. The Japanese did not seek flawless beauty. They sought something quieter, something closer to truth. the beauty that survives time, the beauty that accepts decay. They called it wabi-sabi, a word that cannot be translated, only felt. Wabi-sabi is the art of imperfection. It finds grace in the worn edge of a bowl, in the faded paint of a gate, in the moss that spreads unevenly on stone. It teaches that nothing lasts, nothing is complete, and nothing is perfect, and that this is precisely why everything is beautiful. To see wabi-sabi, you must slow down enough to notice the slight, the subtle, the fleeting, a drop of water trembling on a leaf, a shadow passing across sand, the silence after a bird's call. These are not ornaments, they are truths. Zen stories often begin with small things. One tells of a monk who cherished a simple tea bowl. It cracked one morning while he washed it. He did not mourn. He smiled and continued to use it every day. Years later, the crack filled with gold dust from his hands and tea, a thin, luminous scar. That is wabi-sabi. The Japanese call this art kintsugi, golden joinery, the repair of broken pottery with gold. It is not restoration, but revelation. The crack becomes the most beautiful part. The garden, too, carries such scars. Stones darkened by rain, walls softened by time, wood silvered by sun. Every flaw is a reminder. What is fragile is also sacred. If wabi-sabi teaches how to see imperfection, then ma teaches how to listen to silence. Ma means the space between things, between two stones, two sounds, two moments of breath. It is the pause that gives rhythm meaning, the emptiness that allows form to exist. Without ma, a garden would be cluttered. With it, it breathes. The raked gravel in a Zen garden is ma made visible, pure space, pure potential. It is not nothingness. It is the possibility of everything. Western art seeks to finish. Japanese art seeks to suggest. In a dry garden, nothing is fully revealed. The composition feels open, as if it could continue beyond its borders. That openness is deliberate. It invites the viewer to complete it, not with imagination alone, but with awareness. Every viewer finishes the garden differently. For one, it is sea and shore. For another, mind and stillness. For another, still, a memory of something they have never seen. That, too, is wabi-sabi, an understanding that perfection is sterile, but suggestion is alive. Time is not an enemy in the Zen garden. It is a collaborator. The sun fades wood, rain softens stone, moss fills the edges of gravel paths. Each mark of age adds presence. Each imperfection deepens authenticity. To erase age would be to erase truth, and so the garden is not restored. It is allowed to live. The gardener tends it gently, not to preserve a moment, but to keep the dialogue between now and then live. The garden breathes through time. Even the layout of the garden reflects wabi-sabi. It is never perfectly symmetrical. The angles are slightly off, the lines irregular, the spacing asymmetrical. To the Western mind, this might feel accidental. To the Japanese mind, it feels real, because nature is not straight. It curves, bends, leans. The eye rests more easily on imperfection than on rigidity. The dry garden accepts that truth. It mimics not the design of the divine, but the humility of the world. Wabi Sabi is also the beauty of use, a stone that shines where countless feet have walked, a wood railing polished by 1,000 hands, a path worn smooth by ritual. In Japan, this trace is sacred. It means the place has been lived in. In the Zen garden, the rake lines drawn each morning and erased by evening wind form a quiet record of presence. It is art that breathes with the rhythm of the day. You can feel the monk who shaped it, the thought he carried, the care in his gesture. Even his absence becomes a kind of presence. To embrace imperfection is to let go of control. The Japanese gardener does not seek applause. His success is measured in how completely he disappears. When you look at the garden, you should not see the hand of the maker, only the grace of what is. In that humility lies freedom. Beauty becomes not something to possess, but something to join. You look, you breathe, and for a moment, you belong. At dusk, when the light grows thin and shadows stretch across the gravel, the garden seems to fade. You can no longer tell where one stone ends and another begins. The imperfection of the world melts into perfection of peace. It is then that wabi-sabi reaches its purest form, not an idea, but a feeling, a quiet acceptance that everything passes, and that passing is what makes it beautiful. Nothing is perfect, nothing is complete, nothing lasts, and that is why everything is enough. At first glance, nothing moves in a Zen garden. The stones stay, the gravel lies still, the air itself seems to rest. But if you look long enough, really look, you begin to see motion everywhere. It is not the motion of objects, but of perception, not the movement of time, but of awareness. The garden does not move, you do, and through you, stillness begins to flow. Every morning, a monk takes a rake and draws new lines in the gravel. The sound is soft, a faint scrape, a whisper of order on the earth. He rakes not to change the garden, but to renew it. Each motion follows breath. Inhale, draw, exhale, release. The rhythm is meditation, a slow dance of attention. When the last circle is complete, he steps back. The pattern seems alive, though nothing has moved but air. It is motion captured in repose, a river frozen in thought. And when the wind comes that night, it will erase everything, leaving the gravel blank again, ready to breathe once more. Wind is the secret artist of the dry garden. It shifts grains of sand, softens edges, blurs intention. It moves invisibly, and yet its presence is always known. A brush that paints with absence. When you stand in the garden, you may not feel it, but you see what it has touched. A leaf resting against a stone, a slight depression in the gravel, a trace of air caught in light. The garden is in constant collaboration with what cannot be controlled. That is its wisdom, to let the unseen move through you without resistance. Stillness changes with the sun. At dawn, the stones glow pale silver. the gravel cold with shadow. By noon, the same stones burn gold, and the raked lines shimmer like ripples on a hidden lake. At dusk, the edges dissolve, light withdraws, and the garden exhales. It is never the same garden twice. Each hour a new composition, each shadow a new brushstroke. Time paints in silence, and the viewer, if patient, watches eternity unfold in the slow turn of light. Movement in the Zen garden does not come from the world. It comes from the one who looks. The garden is complete only when observed. Each step, each breath, each blink of the eye becomes part of its choreography. You walk along the veranda, and the perspective shifts. New alignments appear. Stones that seemed separate now echo one another. Patterns merge, lines converge. The garden changes because you are changing. The act of seeing is the act of awakening. The monks go, the garden is still because it contains the whole world's movement. The raked sand is not inert. It holds energy, the trace of every motion that shaped it. Each curve recalls the path of the rake, the drag of wood, the weight of the hand, the breath behind the gesture. The form remains, but the act has passed, a fossil of mindfulness. To see it is to sense that stillness is never static. It vibrates softly, like a string plucked in eternity. To the untrained eye, stillness appears as absence. But in Zen, stillness is full, a saturation of potential. It is like the pause before music, or the breath between thoughts. The garden captures that pause and makes it visible. It teaches the mind to dwell in the moment before movement, where everything could happen, but nothing must. That tension, that balance of readiness and peace, is the heart of its beauty. It is the motion you feel when you stop moving. In the dry garden, there is always water, though none to touch. The monks carved it from gravel, drawing currents with the rake, eddies around stones, waves that fold upon themselves. To look upon it is to see flow without substance, motion made of meaning. The mind completes the illusion. It hears sound where there is none. It feels coolness in warm air. The imagination becomes a tide, and the body begins to sway with a rhythm older than time. The garden has moved you without moving at all. Sit long enough, and the rhythm of your breathing begins to match the garden's. Inhale, you draw in the silence. Exhale, you release the noise. You start to sense the subtle pulse of existence itself, the endless expansion and contraction of everything that lives. The garden mirrors that rhythm, not through motion, but through calm. Stillness is the ultimate movement. It connects all things. To see it, you must slow enough to feel the world breathing. Every Zen garden is built around a paradox: to move without moving, to change without effort, to express everything through almost nothing. That paradox is not a riddle, it is reality. The world moves in cycles, and the garden teaches us to move with it, not through striving, but through stillness. By resting completely, you return to motion's source, and there, at the center of the unmoving world, you finally see that nothing was ever still at all. To be still is not to stop moving, it is to move with everything. The garden is quiet, but it is not empty. Every grain of gravel, every stone, every patch of moss is alive with thought, not human thought, but the thought of being. To understand the dry garden is to understand the mind that made it, and to understand that mind is to glimpse the truth that there is no separation between the garden and the gardener. When a Zen monk builds a garden, he is not shaping the world outside, he is shaping the world within. Each rake line, each placement of stone is an act of attention, a brushstroke of awareness. The result is not a picture, but a mirror, a reflection of consciousness itself. The garden reflects not the sky, not the mountain, but the one who looks. It is the purest form of self-portrait, drawn without the self. In Zen practice, discipline is not control, it is presence. The garden trains the mind in the same way meditation does, through repetition, stillness, and care, to rake gravel daily, to sweep fallen leaves, to watch light and shadow shift, is not labor, it is concentration made visible. Every gesture says, I am here. No thought of past or future, only this stroke, this breath, this moment. The garden becomes a vessel for pure attention, and attention, when perfected, becomes peace. In Zen, a koan is a question that cannot be answered by logic, only by awakening. The garden itself is a koan. What is movement without motion? What is fullness without form? What is sound without sound? You can think about it forever, or you can sit and understand it wordlessly. The mind that stops asking begins to hear, and when it hears, the garden and the self become the same thing. In Western art, the creator seeks to leave a mark. In Zen art, the master seeks to erase it. When you look at a dry garden, you cannot tell who made it. No signature, no inscription, no story of authorship. That is the point. Ego dissolves in simplicity. The garden is perfect only when it no longer belongs to anyone. It becomes pure being, a collaboration between man, stone, and silence. To make such a thing requires humility deeper than talent. It is not about mastery of craft, but surrender to truth. When you walk along the veranda, you may feel as if the garden is thinking. The stones are thoughts, slow, heavy, patient. The raked lines are reasoning, circling, repeating, refining. The gravel is awareness, quiet, open, vast. Together they form a landscape of mind. The viewer does not interpret it. The viewer becomes part of its thought process. Your silence completes its sentence. Your stillness finishes its gesture. And for a moment, you are not looking at the garden. You are looking as the garden. The Zen garden's greatest lesson is that emptiness is not void. It is awareness unshaped. When the mind quiets, it does not vanish. It expands. Just as the gravel field holds infinite movement in its stillness, the empty mind holds infinite understanding in its calm. The absence of thought is not ignorance. It is insight before language. To sit before the garden is to let the mind breathe until it becomes as vast, as open, and as simple as sand. At first, you look at the garden. You notice the stones, the patterns, the composition. Then, slowly, you begin to see differently. You stop naming. You stop analyzing. Sight becomes awareness. Awareness becomes stillness. The longer you look, the less there is to see. And yet, the more there is to feel. You realize that perception itself is the garden's true material. The world outside and the world within have merged. To meditate is not to escape life, it is to see it clearly. The Zen garden is meditation made visible. Each morning, it wakes with the light, receives the sun, listens to the wind, and rests again in night. It does not struggle, it does not strive, it simply is. To live like that, to be fully present, fully still, fully alive, is to live as the garden lives. The stones are lessons. The sand is scripture. The silence is enlightenment itself. Eventually, you rise from the veranda. You take one last look at the stillness behind you, and you realize it has followed you. The garden is no longer a place. It has become a state. Its calm echoes in your breath. Its simplicity lingers in your thoughts. Its silence moves quietly through the noise of the world. You understand now what the monks always knew. The mind of the garden and the garden of the mind are one. You do not enter the garden enters you. There is a garden that needs no walls, no stones, no flowing water. It does not lie in Babylon or Isfahan, nor in Kyoto. It lives quietly in the space behind your breath. Every time you close your eyes, you enter it. Every time you let silence rise instead of thought, you walk its paths again. This is the garden that never fades, the still garden within. Across centuries, civilizations tried to shape peace into form. The Persians drew rivers through stone. The Japanese drew stillness through sand. Both were speaking the same language, the grammar of balance. Each garden was a mirror through which humanity studied itself. The desire to order, to calm, to breathe is the same in every heart. It is older than art, older than empire, older even than religion. It is the longing to belong to something quiet. Listen carefully, and you can still hear them. The echoes of old worlds, layered over one another like soil and time. The hanging gardens, a legend built on longing. Persian Chaharbagh, a geometry of paradise. Zen Karasansui, an ocean drawn from absence. Each was a reflection of what people feared to lose: connection, order, silence. Each tried in its own way to remind us that beauty is not escape, but return. Return to breath. Return to stillness. Return to being. Perhaps all these gardens were not built for gods, but for memory, a way for the living to remember the eternal. The gardener, whether Persian, Japanese, or unknown, was not planting trees. He was planting awareness. Each act of care, each stroke of the rake, each drop of water poured from a clay jar was a small act of devotion to the invisible rhythm of the world. To tend the earth was to tend the soul, and that has never changed. You cannot see this final garden. You can only feel it in the pause between heartbeats, in the quiet between thoughts. It grows without soil, blooms without light, and fades without dying. Its paths are made of attention. Its air smells of memory. Its sound is the pulse of time. You have walked there before, when your mind went still enough to forget itself. There is no entrance. There is no gate. You are always already inside. What connects the gardens of the world is not culture, not tradition, but breath. The Persians made water their symbol, flowing, shining, pure. The Japanese made air their substance, empty, still, aware. Both are one element in two states of being. Water becomes vapor, vapor becomes silence, and both move through us in every breath we take. That breath is the bridge between the outer garden and the inner one, between the seen and the felt, the finite and the infinite. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that does not need to speak. In every culture, the true garden has been a place of listening to wind, to leaves, to the movement of time. When we listen deeply enough, we begin to hear the same sound that the ancients heard, the slow heartbeat of existence, and within it, a whisper, "Be still, you are home." Every garden fades, walls crumble, trees fall, sand scatters, but the pattern remains, not in the ground, but in the mind that remembers it. We are the continuation of those who tended the first gardens. Each time we stop to breathe, each time we notice light, each time we forgive imperfection, we rebuild them invisibly within. Paradise was never a place to escape to. It was always a way of seeing. The hanging gardens reached for heaven. The Persian gardens measured it. The Zen gardens dissolved it. Three ways of speaking, one meaning. Peace is already here. To find it, you need only to look with the eyes of stillness. When you do, you see that the true garden is not something outside of you. It is the way the world feels when your soul is calm enough to notice. The quiet you seek has been waiting inside you all along.
Opa!